I don't know how many of you listen to the program on NPR Science Friday, but it's one of my favorite things to listen to as I run around on Fridays. A couple weeks ago, there was an interview with a couple of neurobiologists and neurologists working at the University of Washington who have been working in the area of consciousness for a lot of years. I mean, they work in all kinds of areas of the brain, but they've really been focusing on consciousness. And it was really interesting to listen to them interviewed a couple people from the scientific community. And the question that the interviewer had is, what is consciousness? And they gave an answer that's very much about, very much in line with what our philosophy believes, but they simply said, it's that part of us that has that experience, that human experience, or, even further, that Andy experience, that Sheila experience. In other words, we wake up in the morning and we have some sort of frame of reference that's based on our belief systems, our histories, our backgrounds, how we view the world. Are we an optimistic person? Are we a pessimistic person? How do we feel about things like faith? How do we feel about things like religion and spirituality? How do we feel about is a good way to put consciousness. Are we a happy person? Are we a person who's not so happy? How do we feel about our relationships? So it's a frame of reference. And the reason that this is so much in line with our teaching is because we believe that it's our consciousness that actually creates our reality. It's the belief systems and paradigms and ideas and how we feel about things that it's the foundation of how we use the law that enables the law to work through us. So, what's really wonderful about science today is that they have actually begun to look at that part of our brain. They know what part of it our brain does that. They've been able to measure it, they've been able to watch it, and as people experience consciousness, as people live their lives, we can actually take a look at this. And so they've done that for a while, and so they decided a few years ago to begin to look at other living things in the world, other children of God in the universe, the four-legged, the eight-legged, the furred, the feathered, the scaled, other living things that we share our world with in terms of their ideas around, in other words, they said, does the capacity of consciousness live within these other children of God? And so one of the places they started was the honeybee. And the reason they looked at the honeybee is because they felt like, well, if anything is completely, purely instinctual, it'd be the honeybee. In other words, the honeybee is sort of like, science kind of views the honeybee almost like a pre-programmed robot, that thing that goes, gets up every morning, goes out in the world, flies around, collects the pollen, brings it back. The life cycle is very predictable. And so they looked at the brain of the honeybee and they were absolutely, completely shocked because they found that in the brain of the honeybee there is actually a larger capacity for consciousness than human beings. And this is amazing because basically what one of the scientists said was, what they're saying is there a belief system around what it is to be a honeybee? In other words, does a honeybee, does it think about religious ideas? How does it feel about itself? How does it feel about its experience? What are some ways that it defines its life? Does it contemplate the meaning of life? Does it wake up in the morning and say, am I a lazy bee? Am I a energetic bee? Am I a type A bee? Am I a BB? And how do I feel about the queen? And how do I feel about the bee that flies out of the hive with me? And am I happy with how much pollen I collected yesterday? Or, what is my standing in this community? And first of all, that in and of itself was really mind-blowing to me in terms of the idea of how brilliant our metaphysical ancestors have been. And I'm talking about our metaphysical ancestors going back thousands of years from all kinds of traditions who have basically taught that the world is vibrant, that life is vibrant, that life is conscious, life is intelligent, and that intelligence exists all around us all the time. And and being that little kid who, picked up the stone on the road and put it in my pocket because somehow I had a connection with it, and all the adults looked at me like I was crazy. I'm starting to feel vindicated. There is a level of consciousness. There is a level of intelligence. But then my mind thought about something else. And I thought about the ideas within spirituality, the ideas that we hang on to, those of us who are spiritual seekers. And one of the ideas would be, say, for example, faith. Where does faith come in? The idea of strength. And very often I think that strength and faith kind of go hand in hand. In terms of when I get up every day and I want to live my life, and I think about my interactions, I think about my relationships, I think about my job, I think about the person I share my life with, and I have feelings about those people, and I think about that in the context of a spiritual idea. So in my mind, I went from the honeybee to the butterfly. And I was thinking about the butterfly has become this symbol of transformation in spirituality. And the butterfly has kind of become this soft, frilly, fragile creature that I think that if most of us look at a butterfly and we say, okay, what would it be like to have a conversation with a butterfly, we would think, well, the butterfly was probably a really nice creature and probably gets its feelings hurt really easy. And so butterfly is something you want to really be careful with. And butterfly is kind of soft and fragile. The other day I was driving around town and there was a woman in front of me, and I was at a stoplight, and on the back of her car she had a decal on the back of her car of a very frilly pink kind of butterfly. And I think we think about that. We think about a butterfly being very fragile, but I was thinking about the life of a butterfly going back to a caterpillar. And I was thinking about that caterpillar's journey. Richard Bach said something to the effect that the cocoon, to the caterpillar, the cocoon is death. To the butterfly, it's birth. And I thought about if we know now that other living things have the capacity for consciousness, we think about that caterpillar who is born and comes into this world, and we know that caterpillars eat their weight in food probably at least every day, if not more. That's all they do is they eat. What a great life. And they don't go to Weight Watchers and they don't worry about food. And so they just eat. And then one day science says that there is a little, I'm not scientific enough to know this, but there's like an enzyme, or there's this little gene inside them that one day there is a switch that flips and everything they eat is turned to poison. And so, but they continue eating. But as it comes into their body, they're literally poisoning their bodies, and they're becoming sick. And their bodies begin to turn on themselves. Their bodies turn on them. And science says, that it's probably one of the most excruciating things that anything in nature goes through. To be driven to eat, but at the same time to become incredibly sick. Because what drives the caterpillar to the cocoon is the caterpillar basically believes it's going to die. It completely, because the cocoon, if you look at it, looks like a coffin. And so this little creature, this little caterpillar, basically marches himself to basically end its life. And if it has a place of consciousness, then what must it think? Richard Bach was probably right. It looks at the cocoon in its future and it says that's death. But it goes there. And what science tells us is if you look at a butterfly's body next to a caterpillar's body, they're profoundly different. And that within, and this starts even before the cocoon, the body begins to turn into something else, which, we think is wonderful, but they say is incredibly painful. And to a caterpillar, it must be incredibly confusing. It must be incredibly scary, the way that we become afraid of change or transition or transformation. But it moves forward. And in listening to Science Friday, I thought to myself, I wonder what's going through in terms of consciousness. I wonder what that caterpillar is doing with that. I wonder what its ideas about life are. I wonder what its ideas about its meaning. What is the meaning of being that caterpillar? How does it feel? Does it have faith? Does it have depression? Does it have optimism? Does it have pessimism? What is going through the consciousness of this caterpillar? But what we know is it is moving forward, and it does what it feels led to do. And so in my mind, and I'm going to make kind of a pretty big leap here. In my mind, I would say that this caterpillar has incredible faith. Because if it has any way within its mind to think about its meaning, then it has to have some sort of faith that what it's entering into is going to be okay. Because you see, that's kind of what's dialed into us as human beings. I'm going to make it through this. There's going to be another side to this. Psychology says that we do not have the capacity to fully take on the concept of, say, for example, death, of just the lights going out. We do not have the capacity for that. Now, some people would say it's because we've never been through it, but there are some people in the psychological world that are beginning to say, why is this true? Why do we not have this capacity? Well, in using the example of the caterpillar and the butterfly, we would say perhaps we don't have that capacity because the caterpillar is running on absolute complete faith, knowing that, okay, I'm going to enter into this place called a cocoon, and at some level, I'm going to emerge. At some level, as Richard Bach says, is it a place of death, or is it a place of birth, or is it a doorway, or what is it? Is it expansive? Is it restrictive, expansive? Is it pessimistic? Is it optimistic? Does it represent death? Does it represent life? These are consciousness kinds of questions. So imagine that caterpillar who is feeling so completely sick. Maybe we can't even imagine how sick it feels because its body is turned against it. In fact, science says that before they even get into the cocoon, the transformation is starting to happen. So they go into the cocoon, they feel led, they feel directed. This is their instincts to build this encapsulation, and they enter into it, and they go into that dormant place. And that dormant place becomes this incredible doorway to something else. So my question is, does the caterpillar have the faith to know that something greater is going to take place? Because the caterpillar, I don't know about caterpillar religion. I don't know if they talk about butterflies. I don't know if they have the concept of butterflies. I don't know if they think about butterflies. But even when we immerse ourselves in spirituality and religion, and we kind of take on that faith, sometimes it can be incredibly difficult to step into something, the unknown. So the caterpillar goes into the cocoon, and we know what happens. Time goes by and they emerge. This is what in metaphysics we would call the idea of faith and strength. The faith that I am going to make it through this. In fact, I'm not only going to make it through this, I'm going to thrive, I'm going to fly, I'm going to move on. But the strength to do it. Because the caterpillar, no matter how sick it is, continues to eat, continues to walk, and then at some point continues to build the cocoon in what we would call this incredible illness that it has. The coming together of strength and faith. In the New Testament mythology, the mythology around Jesus, We know, if you're familiar with the New Testament, Jesus was walking around and eventually he put together a band of 12 guys called the disciples, the apostles. They were with him. And Charles Fillmore, who is the co-founder of Unity, who's done a lot of work on the metaphysical meanings of biblical ideas, biblical mythology. First of all, he looks at the idea of the Messiah, because that was the label that was put on Jesus. And what Charles Fillmore says is that the Messiah means the embodiment of the Christ consciousness. In other words, a particular kind of mission, a particular kind of teaching is referred to as the Messiah. And it's something, when we say, the Messiah is coming or the Messiah is here, we're basically saying there's this illuminated teaching that's coming, or this illuminating teaching that is here. And so in looking at these 12 individuals, Charles Fillmore pulls out a couple of them, and he looks at them metaphysically, and one of them was a guy by the name of Andrew. Andrew was a very strong, assertive, strong-minded kind of person. He was very willful. He had an incredible strength about him. And so Charles Fillmore says he represents strength. And Andrew had a brother named Simon Peter, who most of us get to know in the New Testament. His name is Peter. And Peter was more of a quiet, thoughtful kind of person, studious kind of person. And Charles Fillmore says he represents faith. He liked to, when he wasn't working, he liked to spend time at home contemplating life and reading the scriptures and those kinds of things, the Jewish teachings. And he would go to temple and everything. One day, Andrew is out in the world, and he's not very happy with what's going on in the world. He doesn't like what's going on with the Romans. He doesn't like what's going on with the Jews. He doesn't like what's going on with the temple. Kind of like the Vietnam era, right? A lot of unrest, a lot of unhappy people. In the Bible, in the New Testament, you read about the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus was out there, and the people came, and he talked. And the fact of the matter was that historians say a lot of that was going on. A lot of people were meeting outside the temples because the Jews did not like what was going on in the temples. They didn't like what was going on with the Romans. There was all this protest and unrest. And Andrew was one of those guys. He was pretty unhappy. And again, being assertive and being strong-willed and being outspoken, being charismatic, being gregarious, he was out there in it. And one day, he's looking, so he spends his life looking for a different teaching, looking for an idea he can grab a hold of. And one day he discovers it, and it happens to be this character named Jesus. And he says, the Messiah is here. And Fillmore basically says, he discovers a teaching, he discovers a philosophy. He said, wow, this is a teaching I can resonate with. This is a teaching I can believe in. This is a teaching that I can grab a hold of. Consciousness, right? Is something he can agree with. So he runs home and he grabs his brother, Simon Peter, and he says, I found the Messiah and I want to introduce him to you. And, Peter's about, I'm studying the scriptures and I'm busy being a good Jew and everything. And Andrew, being that assertive, strong figure, grabs him and says, come with me. And he introduces him to Jesus, and Peter ends up listening to Jesus and he agrees. He says, wow, this is a truth. This is something I can agree with. This is something I can believe in. It's like a lot of us, when we find a teaching that resonates with us, we say, wow, I feel like I've come home. I'm hearing the truth. And so Fillmore says that these two men who end up going with Jesus and become part of the apostles, they are the two apostles that are the brothers. They are the brotherhood. And Fillmore says the brotherhood within us is faith and strength. Faith and strength. It is that place that caterpillar enters into. Basically, Jesus at one point looks at Peter and he says, you are the rock of my teaching. And of course, Catholicism has taken that. That's why they look at Peter as being the rock of Catholicism. They celebrate him, especially in the Vatican. And basically what Fillmore is saying is that Jesus was recognizing that it takes an incredible amount of strength to have faith to move forward. We talk a lot about, in our philosophy, about creating the lives that we want to live. We talk about having abundance and happiness and peace and wisdom in our lives, that we have the capacity to do that. And we talk in our teaching about the deeper meaning of life. And what I mean by that is, very often when we, as people in this teaching, if someone will go through a divorce or go through a financial situation or go through a job situation and go through a troubling time, we teach, what is the lesson there? What is to be learned there? What was the thing, what was the wisdom to pull out of that? And very often when it's all over, we can look back and we can see the wisdom and we can see what we learned and we can see the gifts in what we went through. But the real question, and Thich Nhat Hanh in his work does a really good job of this, the real question is the idea, when I'm entering into that place, am I open to the gift? Am I open to what I'm going to learn? Am I open to what I'm going to be able to manifest out of this? Thich Nhat Hanh says that basically, if we have the strength and faith of our convictions and of our beliefs, then we can stand on the front end of something, a relationship issue is happening, a financial issue is happening, a job issue is happening. Can we stand in that place and say, I know that regardless of how challenging or difficult this is going to be, there's an incredible wisdom here for me. That's the story of the butterfly. And if we follow the ideas in the New Testament around the Jesus mythology, we know that for those 12 guys who hung out with Jesus, well, actually 13 because Mary Magdalene was hanging out too, it was a rough ride. And we know, according to the mythology, a couple of them were executed. They fled all over the place, including Andrew and Peter. And so Jesus looked at them and basically said, you want to grab a hold of this teaching? It's going to be a rough ride. And that's why he referred to Peter as a rock, because he said, with faith and strength, it is the idea. That is the idea that I grab a hold of, knowing that life is richer and fuller and more profound and more expansive, because I'm willing to go and see what there is here to expand my awareness. Imagine for a moment how the life of the caterpillar changes when it becomes a butterfly. That caterpillar that is, you look at the caterpillar, the embodiment of having to stay close to the earth, that little round, cute, roly-poly thing that is wandering around the leaves and plants. And can it even imagine that one day it will fly above those same plants? But to know that on the front end, through wisdom and faith, through strength and faith. Charles Fillmore says, the meaning of the apostles Andrew and Simon Peter, the brothers, is the mental combination of strength and faith. Strength is celebrated when it finds the inexhaustible source of all strength, which is spirit. Faith is the capacity of the mind to fully and truly believe. When strength finds faith, they are brothers consciously in mind, a bond of unity to establish that carries one along even though one may encounter the most diverse experiences. What's interesting about that is that it's not just about what Fillmore is saying here is that in the process of creating the life we want, in the process of the caterpillar becoming the butterfly, it may not always happen instantaneously. And there may be incredible lessons to learn along the way. I mean, what lessons are learned in that cocoon? What lessons are learned in the way that the caterpillar makes its transformation? But Fillmore says, strength and faith bring us to the other side. You know, nowadays, I mentioned earlier the Vietnam era and the era when Jesus was supposedly walking the earth, those being turbulent times. I think that we would agree that there are some aspects of our times now that are pretty turbulent. Some aspects of our life now, of our time, that give us incredible areas of transformation. I think for those of us who value peace, for those of us who truly value wisdom, for those of us who truly value spiritual seeking, who truly value oneness, who truly value the idea that abundance is a birthright of each and every one of us. Everyone who lives in this world. That's a birthright. I think that today can sometimes be a challenging time. And I think that for those of us who are standing in that place of standing for those things, standing for those beliefs, we can be somewhat challenged. But the idea, like the honeybee and the caterpillar and us, is to wake up in the morning and have a concept of who and what we are. To have a broader idea, an ideal of who and what we are. To know that we have the capacity to not just be the caterpillar in consciousness, but to also be the butterfly in consciousness. And to know that for everyone around us. To get up every day in that place of faith and strength. As Jesus said, it becomes the rock on which we build our own personal ministries. I don't know if any of you ever think of yourself as a minister or what your ministries are. What do you represent in this world? What do you represent to your families? Where do you stand on all the things that we see going on in the world around us? What do you aspire to? Are you a pessimistic person? Are you optimistic? Are you spiritually minded? Are you materially minded? What do you aspire to? What is it that you would like to see your sisters and brothers experience around you? What is it that you want to experience yourself? And that's, as Jesus said, that is the rock on which we stand every single morning. So today, what I wanted to do was when you came in on your chair, you found a call and response. So I'd like to go through this with you to end today. This will be our ending prayer. And I would invite you, if you think there's any value in this, to take it with you today. Put it on the refrigerator, do what you want. Because this becomes our affirmation of stepping into what it is that we want to advocate. So the dark font is what I'll read, and then your response is the next piece. And then at the end of this, I just want us to sit in it for a minute, and then we'll do it, and so it is, and we'll go on from there. So I would encourage you, if you can, to put your right hand on your heart, please. Stepping into a place of advocating for love.
I will pursue the attitudes of strengthening faith.
Stepping into a place of advocating for abundance.
I will pursue the attitudes of strengthening faith.
Stepping into a place of advocating for wisdom. Stepping into a place of advocating for illumination.
I will pursue the attitudes of strengthening faith.
Stepping into a place of advocating for peace.
I will pursue the attitudes of strengthening faith.
And so it is.